and welcome to the latest installment of our digital discussion series to do with our exhibit, Milwaukee, Where the Waters Meet, which is on display through the end of this month. Because can you believe it? It's April. I know, no fooling. We're not messing around tonight at all. We have a real legit program. Tales of Great Lakes Shipwrecks with Anna Lardinois of Gothic Milwaukee. That'll be in just a second here after I tell you kind of some of the stuff that's going on with the Historical Society. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly suggest you do. We have a podcast we launched with the UW Milwaukee History Department called The Healthiest City, Milwaukee and Its Pandemics. So if you're interested in the last pandemic Milwaukee went through to do with the influenza of 1918, you can learn all about it. It's really well done and in nice little chunks too. It's like 15 to 25 minutes each, so you can knock those out while you're doing stuff around the house too, and they're really well done and interesting. Next week's talk, our next installment for this exhibit about water in Milwaukee, is Captain Frederick Pabst Beyond the Brewhouse. So that will be done in partnership with the Pabst Mansion and presented by John Eastberg. So make sure you tune in for that, because John Eastberg does always a fantastic job. And one final thing before I turn things over to Anna is that we have a collaborative beer that ties in kind of with tonight's talk a little bit. It's called the Lady Elgin Foreign Extra Stout. It was brewed by Indeed Brewing Company on South 2nd Street in Walker's Point. And you can get that on tap there now and take it to go in crowlers and growlers and stuff like that. And $1 of every purchase made on that beer goes to the Milwaukee County Historical Society. So you can support history and have some fun in the process. But that's enough out of me, because we have an audience that is raring to go to learn about these Great Lakes shipwrecks. And so she is Milwaukee's favorite haunted tour guide and gearing up for what should be a busy season of scaring the bejesus out of people. But if you have any questions for Anna at the end, make sure to put those in the comments. There'll be a short Q&A at the end, but I'll let Anna take it from here with Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes. Have at it.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be with you today to talk about something that I love, which is maritime disasters. So a little bit about me. I am probably best known for doing haunted historical tours. You may have read my Milwaukee Ghosts and Legends, Storied and Scandalous Wisconsin, which came out at the end of 2020. Really excited to talk about Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes, which is coming out in July. And if you've ever just seen me walking around and not wearing a spooky hoop skirt, it could have been because of Walking Milwaukee, which is a collection of totally not spooky self-guided tours of downtown, and I have a collection of TOSA. So that's a little bit about who I am. I just kind of fell in love with the Great Lakes, like many of us do, because we live on the shores of this amazing lake. And it always captured my imagination. When I was a little girl, the song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, was popular. So I think, I'm pretty old. And my family had a ship in a bottle. And I used to just love to look at it and listen to that song. And ever since then, I've just been fascinated by shipwrecks, because you're already in peril when you're on a ship. And everything that happens after that is just more scary. So I've collected tales from each of the Great Lakes that aren't just shipwrecks. They also have a supernatural component. So if you're in the mood for a little bit of shipwreck and a little bit of spooky, tonight's going to be your night. If we were to count down some of the most legendary wrecks on the lake, the Eastland has the greatest number of deaths. It's the worst maritime disaster to this day to ever occur on the Great Lakes. And that's 844 people dead. That all happened before they really ever left the dock. The supernatural component to that, besides having entire neighborhoods, whole families wiped out, is these people who were so prematurely pulled from life. They went on to haunt a number of buildings, and one of them is one that gained a great deal of fame. Eventually, a place where many of the bodies were taken from when they were pulled from the river became Oprah Winfrey's studio, Harpo Studios. And it was believed that her studios were haunted by those who were lost in the Eastland. The second worst maritime disaster that ever occurred on the Great Lakes is the Lady Elgin. It's our Milwaukee claim to maritime disaster fame. We really don't know exactly how many people died on that ship, but it was a terrible disaster that left over 1,000 children in the Irish Third Ward orphaned. And then the third worst disaster to ever occur on the lakes was on Lake Erie, and that was the J.P. Griffith. What really happened there is the ship has a fire and people can't get out of it. So their deaths are extra tragic in that sense that they can see that this is coming and do nothing about it. And then a lot of people are really surprised that the Edmund Fitzgerald only has 29 dead because it is so famous. Usually when I talk about these ranks, people are always thinking that the Edmund Fitzgerald is really going to be high up there, but it's a working ship. I know that when I was a little girl, I did not have an understanding of what this ship really looked like, but it was a rather unromantic looking freighter, unlike the multi-sailed ship that I imagined in my mind. We're not going to talk about these popular stories tonight. They're all great. They're all definitely included in the book. But I wanted to take you to visit ships that might not be as popular for you, and I hope that you enjoy that. So perhaps the best way to do this would just be to kick back, enjoy this, maybe close your eyes because these pictures don't do any of these stories justice, and just relax and try to take yourself there, and I hope you like it. So the first collection of stories I'm going to talk about are about premonitions. And we'll start with the Western Reserve. The Western Reserve, she might not look it in this photo, but she was big and fast. She was one of the very first steel ships that ever sailed on the Great Lakes. She was sleek and modern, even though our eyes might not see that. She had all kinds of speed records. She was just a bit longer than a football field. She was owned by a millionaire named Peter Minch. And not only was he a millionaire, but he was a maritime enthusiast. And so he had been sailing the lakes for most of his life. And he decides in the summer of 1892 that he's going to take his amazing ship that people are in awe of, and he's going to turn one of its runs into a family vacation. So the boat leaves from Ohio with their 21 crew members, but also aboard is Peter Minch, the captain as well, his wife, Anna, their two children, a 10-year-old boy named Charlie, 6-year-old little girl named Florence, and Anna decides that she'll bring her sister and her 9-year-old niece. So they're going on this fun family trip, and they shove off at the end of August in 1892, and things are going beautifully. The weather is lovely. They leave from Cleveland, so they go through Erie. They are headed out to Superior. And 2 days later, they get to Superior. And the fine weather that they had when they left Cleveland has disappeared. They found themselves in the midst of a rare August gale. The ship was being battered by heavy waves and intense northwestern winds, something that is just not expected in August. But the owner of the boat, Peter Minch, wasn't one little bit worried. This was supposed to be one of the stoutest boats on the lake. He thought it was indestructible. A lot of people thought it too. The captain of the ship, even though he knew that the ship had a great reputation, he was keeping it close to shore. But Peter Minch said, basically, quit being a chicken. Go out into the open waters. This boat can take it. The boat was empty, so it was riding high in the waves. And it was being just punished by the storm. Hour after hour of being battered by the waves. At about 9 o'clock at night, everyone on board heard an explosion, a tremendous crash, and they discovered that this steel ship was splitting in two. Water was rushing in through this crack. This ship was going down and fast. They were able to get everyone into the lifeboats. There were 2 lifeboats, one wooden one. The family and some of the key crew went into it. And then there was a smaller metal one, and the rest of the crew went into that. And they sat in these 2 lifeboats being tossed in the waves, watching this massive ship whose engines were still running at this time sink to the bottom of Lake Superior. And it only took about 10 minutes before it disappeared. And as these 2 boats are sitting there stunned, a huge wave comes up and knocks the metal lifeboat over, capsizes. And the people in the wooden one are stunned, and so they instantly start rowing through this storm to try to help the people in this capsized boat. But only 2 heads pop up over the waves. Everyone else is dead. So they pluck the wheelsman out of the water and the captain's son, who's also working on the ship, and they bring them aboard this small wooden ship. They have oars, they have 1 bucket, and they have 60 miles to go, and they are in a stout storm. Because the ship, the smaller boat, it's now overfilled with people. It's riding really low in the water. It's about a foot above the waterline, but the waves are raging over and over. So people on the boat have to spend all of their time bailing it out. And there's only 1 bucket to bail. So a few men still have their hats on their heads. So they use it to begin to bail out the ship. It's an exhausting night. Rain and wind is pelting them. They're freezing, and they're miles from any kind of safety in the dark on Lake Superior. And then they see some red lights in the distance. And their spirits are instantly lifted. They see a freighter. Now, they don't have a light or anything on their boat, but they have hope. So they start screaming into the roaring wind and waves to try to get the attention of the freighter. It doesn't work. They move around as much as they can in this boat without capsizing it. Can't get their attention. So one of the women in the boat takes off her shawl, and they try to light it on fire to get some kind of attention. But that shawl is soaked through and through, just like everything else in that boat. They couldn't even get it to smoke. As they watch those red lights drift away, they realize that they're definitely on their own. And they continue to row and bail and keep the kids close to them, and they hope that they can make it to shore. So around dawn, they start to see shore on the horizon, and they get extremely happy. As I'm sure you can imagine, they're cold, they're wet, they're hungry, they're weather battered, and they're now within a mile of shore. They can see it. They can almost taste the sand. And as they get even closer, the yawl is hit by a massive wave and it capsizes. And when people pop their heads above water, only 1 person is left. It's the wheelsman. This is the 2nd time he's been on a capsized boat and made it. No one else comes above the water. He can't believe that he's the only survivor of this. He grabs a life preserver and tries to swim the mile to shore. But he's exhausted and battered. And he's drifting in and out of consciousness. And it takes this 24-year-old man, healthy guy, 2 hours to get to shore. And when he finally reaches the beach, he realizes that he is not as near to being rescued as he thought he was going to be, because now he has to travel another 10 miles to get to the rescue station. There's no other horse. If he does not move these 10 miles, he's not going to make it. So he begins to walk through the forest. He falls, he sometimes crawls across the forest floor to get to this rescue station. And he makes it the 10 miles. So he shows up to this rescue station. And if you can just imagine what he must look like, he is covered in dirt and debris. He's bleeding. He is shaking from exhaustion. And he finally gets to that door. And the person who opens the door for him at the Deer Park rescue station is a man named Benjamin Trudell. And he starts telling him, well, this is what happened to me. I was on the Western Reserve and my boat sunk. And as he's going through it, he is watching the man, Trudell, that he's telling this to. His face has grown pale. And he looks beyond Trudell and he sees the men inside of the rescue station are also struck with a look of shock. And he discovers that the night before, Trudell had a hard time sleeping. And he woke up in the middle of the night startled because he had an incredibly vivid dream that a ship sunk in Lake Superior. He was so certain that this was true that he put on his clothes and went to go find the night watchman to see if any ship had sunk. And the man said, no, this is clearly just a dream. Everything is fine. Go back to bed. And when he goes back to sleep, he is immediately pulled into the dream again. And he talks in the dream about walking along the beach and looking for survivors. And one of the people he encounters in the dream is this well-dressed man who stands up from the surf and he shakes the hand of Trudell. Well, that startles him awake and he just can't fall back asleep. And he's having such a hard time struggling with this dream that he tells all of his colleagues in the rescue station about it, and they've been kind of ribbing him. And now, hours later, this man shows up at their door saying that he has been in a shipwreck. So they gear up, they go out to the beach, and they try to look for survivors. The rescuers recover the boat, but it's empty. And they discover a few bodies on the beach, one man and one woman. The man is laying face down in the sand. And when Trudell sees him, a shiver runs through his body. He instantly recognizes that body. It is the same man from his dream. An engraved wristwatch telling his name reveals that definitely this is the same man. It was Peter Minch. Now, there were times when Ben Trudell in the years later would tell this story, and he would add this detail. He would say when he turned the body over to reveal its face, its arm kind of flopped out, and his hand, the hand of the corpse, touched Trudell's hand, and it mimicked the handshake from the dream. Eventually, the rescuers find 16 of the bodies, They bury them in a shallow grave. When people look back at that night, they're so confused. They think, first of all, how could this ship that seemed indestructible sink? And how could it do so so quickly? And what is the story with that dream? Was it a premonition? Could this have been prevented? We don't know. It's largely believed now that the Western Reserve was built with brittle steel, and that's what caused it to split. But she remains lost under the waves. She's probably between 400 and 600 feet beneath the surface of Lake Superior, and she may never be rediscovered. Today, when we talk about the Western Reserve, we don't often talk about the dream or the corpse on the beach, because the Western Reserve now is famous for being part of the ghost fleet of ships on the Great Lakes. They are supposed to still sail these treacherous waters of the lakes, and she is often spotted near Deer Park Station. And people swear that on a calm night, you can hear sounds of laughter and voices talking from this ghostly ship that sails by. And then it's surrounded by fog and gently glides out of sight. So that is the story of the Western Reserve, but certainly not the only Great Lakes tragedy that's connected to a dream. On this same page is another boat, a really different kind of boat that also is connected to a dream. And this occurs on Lake Huron. This little ship that we see in the photo with all of those people waiting to get it. This is a real photo of the ship. And this ship was in charge of going to all of the little islands and ports in the Georgian Bay, the Perry Sound area, which is really lovely, but rather remote. And this ship would carry everything. In its very last run, which is in November of 1879, she's got livestock, she's got whiskey, and she's got lots and lots of people on her, because it's going to be the last run of the season, the last time you can make money, the last deliveries for months, because we know that the lake is brutal in November, December, January. The wind howls, the icy waters become impassable. And the captain knows this too. So he's eager to get out there. But it has been snowing, the winds have been high, the waves have been heavy, and there hasn't been a break in the weather to get out. And so they have been in Collingswood, which is where the boat is, for a few days. Everyone is eager to go except for a newlywed woman on the boat named Kate. She is a new bride of a doctor, and they are going to their new town, McKellar Village, where he is going to be the only doctor. And on board, they have everything they own. They have all of their household goods, everything he needs to begin his practice. It's all there. And as they're waiting in Collingswood for the next leg of their journey, and they've been there for a few days, Kate, that morning, is talking with her husband over breakfast and says, "Honey, I had a terrible dream. A dream that we are all going to die on this boat." She tries to convince her new husband that even though all of their things are already on the boat and they've already paid for these tickets, it would really be a much better idea to travel to their new home by train. But her new husband is thrifty. He does not want to do this. He's trying to convince her that they are definitely going on this boat. And while they're having this breakfast conversation, the captain overhears. And he tries to convince her. He promises her that he would never leave if it was dangerous. And they will never do anything that will put people in jeopardy. Well, she realizes that there's really no recourse here. Her husband's not going for it. The captain is trying to make her feel foolish for thinking this. She's just going to have to go along with it. And the weather, it just becomes worse as the day goes on. The winds and the snow continue. The waves are high. And the captain is up all night. He's waiting for just a moment in the weather where it can break and he can leave. He needs to make this run. Many of the people who had booked passage on the boat decided to just stay in town at a hotel because they'd already been on the boat for a few nights and it's a rocky, uncomfortable situation. So they went to hotels, but Kate and her husband, they are thrifty and they stay on the ship. So at 3 a.m, when the captain decides that there is enough break in the weather that they can go, he gets the ship fired up. He sends someone into town to start getting the passengers that were at hotels to come down to the deck. Some of them do, some of them don't. A man who is on shore just decides to quit, saying, "No, my season's done." And that was the wheelman. The captain didn't care because he needed this to go. So shortly after 3 a.m, they set sail into the lake. About 18 miles away from Collingswood, a lighthouse man noticed them and made a note of it, that even though it was snowing and the waves were high, that little wooden ship was still holding her own. Well, when that little wooden ship didn't arrive in the port when it was supposed to, people assumed that the captain had just pulled into a port to ride out the weather. And then once the weather cleared and the ship still didn't arrive when it was supposed to, they decided to send a tug out and take a look. They didn't find the ship. They didn't find any passengers. But what they did find was the log, a capsized lifeboat, and some life belts, all marked with the name of the ship. They searched for days, but they never discovered a living or dead passenger that was on the ship. To this day, the ship nor any of the bodies have ever been discovered. And this has become a part of the legacy and legend of the Parry Sound. And I also imagine an opportunity for many women to remind their husbands that there is wisdom in listening to their wives. Because had her warning been heeded, perhaps they would have lived. So just a few stories that have to do with premonitions. And now I'm going to tell a little longer story. And this is closer to home. This happens on Lake Michigan in 1847. It's a story of the Phoenix, and it's a really sad story. And it also has ghosts, so it's a story I like. The Phoenix was one of the first propeller steamboats to ever sail on Lake Michigan. And her job primarily was to run the Up the Lakes route, which you might know is running from the East Coast through the Great Lakes, because it was much easier for people and goods to be transported that way in 1847. And The boat was not only filled with goods, but it had about 300 people on it. And most of those people were people who had just arrived in New York to immigrate to the US. About 175 of the 300 people on board were Dutch. Many of them were coming to these Dutch settlements that were in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that some of us are from. So the Phoenix is coming through in November, and it is having a horrible time getting through the lakes. It is running into gale after gale. The winds are high and heavy for days. The waves are relentless. The captain is tossed about so much that he is injured and bedridden. It's rough, and that's November on the lakes. And it complicates things that a lot of people on the ship don't speak English. So it's hard for the crew to communicate what's happening. By November 20th, they've been on the lake for about 10 days, and they're exhausted. So they decide that they're going to take a break in Manitowoc. Manitowoc is about 30 miles north of Sheboygan, which is where many of them were going. So they get a rest from the heavy weather. The crew goes into town to get more wood for their wood-burning, steam-powered engine. And some people believe that while the crew was there, they may have wet their whistles at a few of the local establishments. So the ship is anchored there, and people are finally getting the opportunity to relax because they're out of the storm. The ship sets sail again around 1 o'clock in the morning. And most of the passengers are asleep, but something's strange about the ship. And it wakes a few of the passengers up. By 3 in the morning, there's a number of passengers up and a number of men outside the engine room door, and they're trying to get in. They think that there's something wrong. The crew refuses to let them in. One passenger is even slugged in the face by a crew member because he was so insistent on going in. But by 4 in the morning, everyone knew the truth. There was definitely something wrong. The ship was on fire, and the crew could no longer hide it. What had happened was the engines had burned so incredibly hot that they started the wood that surrounded them on fire. And despite everything that the crew tried to do, we couldn't get the fire out. And the flames were just eating the ship as quickly as they had ever seen anything happen. So they realized that they had to immediately evacuate the ship. This is unfortunate because even though there are more than 300 people on the ship, there are only 2 lifeboats. And each of the lifeboats only hold 20 people. This was illegal in 1847, but it was a law that was not regularly enforced. So if you can imagine, these fire alarms are ringing like crazy. People are waking up. A lot of them don't speak English, so they really don't know what's happening. And there's only these 2 lifeboats. So once they fill those and they sail away, everyone else who's left on the ship realizes that they are in terrible trouble. The flames are consuming this wooden ship at a rate that they can hardly believe. And they can't jump in the water because the water is so icy that to go in the water is to die of hypothermia. To stay on the ship is to be burned to death. And people didn't know what to do. People started climbing the masts to try to outrun the flames, but the flames were insatiable. They kept climbing and climbing, and eventually there was no place to run. Some people stood on chains or anything that wasn't flammable, but everything around them burned. People seeing this started throwing anything that floated into the water. They were going to try to save themselves. So people are throwing doors, pieces of wood, settees, and trying to jump on them to save themselves. Well, some of those people missed their target and never resurfaced. Others, like a cabin boy people remember seeing, who clung to a ladder, froze to death on top of the water. Another gruesome memory that a survivor shared was of a woman who made it onto a settee who was floating away from the burning ship. But she was so overcome with terror that she fainted and slipped beneath the waves. People see death all around them and they realize there's nowhere for me to go. Two little girls who could actually see Sheboygan, which is where they were going. It was only 5 to 7 miles away at this point. They can see it. They want to go there, but they can't get there. They take each other's hands and they walk to the edge of the boat. And still with their hand in each other's hand, these sisters jump off the ship and sink to the bottom of the lake. And they remain in their icy grave. The boat is burning so hotly, it's throwing off so much fire and heat, it's actually waking people up from their sleep who live in Sheboygan 5 to 7 miles away. People are waking up, they go to the window, they see this tremendous fire, and they feel compelled to help. So people are going down to the boatyards. Some of them are just trying to manually row their own little rowboats to save people. Two of the big steamers start firing up their engines and trying to get out of there. Luckily, the two lifeboats that made it away from the ship actually make it to shore. And so they're directing the people on shore how to help the people who are still stuck on the Phoenix. And the first ship that can get there is a ship that's a steamer. Her name is the Delaware. And once she gets out there, she sees how terrible this truly is. The ship has actually burned to the waterline. And they see lots of people bobbing in the water, but only 3 are still alive. So they pluck those 3 living souls out of the water, 2 employees and 1 passenger, and they bring them aboard. And they decide to tow this skeleton of a ship back to shore. Everyone else is lost. And just try to imagine being one of those 43 people who made it in the lifeboats and are watching all of this happen from the beach. And they're watching everything that they've ever owned in their whole life burning in the lake. And maybe their friends and maybe their family in this country that they don't know. Luckily, Sheboygan embraces them and takes care of them until they can move on to their next destination. But that definitely does not end this tragedy. So the next morning, the Delaware is going back out, and it comes upon a floating graveyard. There are 30 to 40 bodies floating in this frigid water, their faces contorted into their screams of terror. And the captain of the Delaware decides that instead of stopping and plucking these bodies out of the water, he sails on. Now, you might know that sailors are a really superstitious group of people. And some of the crew see that and they realize in that moment, the Delaware is now cursed because it let those people go to a watery grave rather than returning them to their home. Curses are happening all over. So as these bodies are not picked up, they're eventually finding their way onto the beach. And people in Sheboygan are discovering the bodies and looting them. And soon charred currency begins floating through town. And people start believing that those who have handled this charred currency are in for a run of bad luck. And maybe all of that is true because something did happen to the Delaware. The Delaware eventually takes on water and sinks. And she takes with her all 11 crew members. Now, there is still a haunted legacy of the Phoenix today. As these people were washing up on shore, they were washing up in the areas that is now the yacht club and now a park. And people sense that the spirits of those who were so desperate to get to shore and never made it alive are still there. There are all kinds of reports of cold spots in both the park and in the yacht club. Recorded evidence of lights turning on and off by an unseen hand in the yacht club, and even sightings of a ghostly man walking through the yacht club's basement. And a number of people throughout the history have claimed to see something in the water at night washing up to shore, something that's been attributed to ghostly bodies. So why did this happen? No one can be sure. The people who survived really believed that it was because the crew got drunk on shore, came back, forgot to put water in the boilers, let them burn too hot, and that's what started the ship on fire. The engineer who survived hotly contested this until his death. He said no, it was a malfunctioning flue. We don't know exactly how many people were lost. It's estimated about 250 people were lost. The ship's log was lost. A lot of the people were coming to this country all on their own. So no one was waiting for them. No one knew that they didn't make it. So their death is unreported. But if you believe the legend, their spirit lingers on, at least in the park, on that beach, and perhaps the yacht club. So that is the story of the Phoenix. How are we doing out there? I know it's really hard to do this when I can't see you. I hope that you're having fun. I will tell you one more story. It's definitely not lighter, but it has a little modern twist. And it's not a fun story. I don't even know why I'm smiling. But it does have a nice ghost. So this is a story of the Ironsides, and this has a very Milwaukee origin. So it happens on Lake Michigan, and this boat spends most of its time in Milwaukee. It runs from Milwaukee to Grand Haven, Michigan. So on the bottom, she's all cargo. On the top, she's all luxury. And this ship, when it was built, was a true gem. It had all kinds of things that people didn't even have in their house. Hot and cold running water, mahogany, marble. It had it all. And on the surface, it looked fantastic. But below deck, the crew knew that this ship was not going to last too much longer. It leaked badly, and it leaked so badly that the crew started unpacking the ship in secret because they didn't want anyone to see exactly how wet the cargo was. the crew told the owners, this needs a whole new hull. And the owners were like, nah, you know what it needs? Another coat of paint, a few replaced boards, it'll be fine. This really comes to a crisis in the summer of 1873. The owners of the Ironsides have to pay the crew more than the going rate to get onto this boat that they knew was not seaworthy. The crew are a bunch of young guys, and they think, well, you know, I'm just going to do this a couple more times, get this extra money. It won't be me that's stuck when this sinks. So the crew in the maritime community know all about this ship, but the people who are buying tickets still think that this is an absolutely luxurious ship that is not only incredibly safe, but it is a joy to ride. And that is what Henry Valentine thought when he purchased tickets for his wife and his young son to make this pleasure trip across the lake to Michigan. Nettie and her little Henry are going on this first trip away from home. Their little boy is remembered in these tales as looking like a tiny angel. He shows up to the dock of this ship in a little blue sailor suit. They describe him with his rings of golden curls, his big blue eyes, and he captured the heart of everyone on that ship. Henry, the grown-up, walks his wife and his son onto the ship. They walk around. Little Henry cannot be more excited to be on the ship. He steals the hearts of all the other passengers, and then when that final whistle blows, Big Henry knows that he has to leave his family. So he gives them kisses. He walks back on the pier, and then he waves to them until he can't see them anymore. Mother and son spend the rest of their night in their stateroom, snuggled in bed. And as I'm sure you probably have guessed, they run into some bad weather. An unexpected gale in summer, and the winds are punishing. Now, this boat is twisting and turning in the waves, and every time it does that, it springs another leak. All of those little holes and cracks that have been patched by nothing more than paint are coming open, and water is rushing in to the belly of this boat. The pumps are going full blast. It does nothing. The water is knee deep in the boat's belly by 7 a.m. And they are now in the heart of this storm. Waves are coming so hard that they crash through the gateway, and by 9 a.m., the engines are flooded. Well, the captain knows they can't go on. So he knows that they have to get into lifeboats and go. The engines are gone. That's it. Game over. In this story, there are plenty of lifeboats. There are plenty of life jackets, and everyone gets one. But these lifeboats are very light. And so even though everyone made it into the lifeboats, they are being dangerously tossed in the waves. And the captain is watching these light boats capsize in these waves that are reaching 8 to 12 feet high. Of the 5 lifeboats that left, only 2 make it to shore. And neither Nettie or her little baby made it. So once the storm dissipates, they go out to the boat to see if they can recover bodies, maybe a survivor, and they go out there. And it doesn't take very long at all to find Nettie. She's bobbing in the water, still in her life belt. But they couldn't find that baby at first. And they were really reluctant to leave it there in the water. So they search and search. And they finally discover this little boy buried in the sand. But when they free him, they're stunned because he looks flawless. There's not a scratch on him. He looks the way that they describe him, as almost sleeping, like a little sleeping angel. And that's strange. So they take the little sleeping angel out of the sand and put him in a pine box with his mother. And that's how they return to Milwaukee with the 27 other people who survived. Henry Valentine has been notified of this, and he comes to the boat hoping and praying that the information is wrong and that his family is okay. But instead of having them run into his arms, he gets the pine box. Nettie and her son are buried here in Milwaukee. But many people don't believe that Henry is resting comfortably here. And this story really gets solidified on August 6th, 2000. Because on that date, there's a Coast Guard festival in Michigan, and a thick fog rolls in. The crew on the Coast Guard ship, the Mackinac, they hear the sounds of a little boy crying for help in the fog. Now, these aren't kooky ladies who run a ghost tour business. These are U.S. Coast Guard people. And they hear something, and they're there to rescue people. So even though they can't see anything, the voice sounds so near. So they go out to look for him, but they can't find anyone. The persistent cries worry them so much that they start going from boat to see if anyone needs any help. But no one does. No one's missing. No one's in distress. The radios have no one reporting problems. But these Coast Guard people just can't understand this. This didn't come out of nowhere. And so when they're trying to make sense of things and they look close to the area where the Mackinac was, they discover that it was almost on top of the site of the Ironsides wreck. So maybe what they heard was not an earthly source of distress. Maybe it was little Henry crossing time, trying to get out of that cold water. It's hard to know, but it's something definitely worth considering. I hope you've enjoyed these stories, and I would love to answer any questions that you have. If you have to go, I'd just like to mention before you do go that Milwaukee Boat Tours and Gothic Milwaukee will be working together this summer on Thursday nights. We will be doing a shipwreck tour. So you'll hear different shipwreck stories as you sail onto the lake. So if that sounds like a good time to you, certainly check us out. We would love to entertain you and give you more spectacular shipwrecks.
Awesome job, Anna. That was always fun. I love your style of storytelling, as does everybody on here. Lots of great comments about how people were enjoying themselves through this program tonight. So thank you for sharing your storytelling gift, as well as your research and the stories in general. They're just fascinating.
Great. Do we have any questions?
We're letting people catch up with the end of the presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask,
Yes.
basically, when does this book come out?
Oh, thanks for asking. So the book will launch at Boswell Books on July 13th.
Okay.
But I know that lots of great places that sell books, like Milwaukee County Historical Society, will sell them. And if you buy a book from them, it will be signed because I will come down and sign it for you.
Awesome. Cool. We will have it for sale at the Milwaukee County Historical Society, and we have your past titles there as well. So if people are in that spooky mood, they definitely can check that out. A question I had is basically, as you were researching this and putting a book like this together, did you ever get the spooky feeling that these people were with you?
This is such a hard question for me because I'm super suggestible. So I always think things are around me. And yes, sometimes I do. But I'm super suggestible.
Sure.
This book was probably one of the most difficult things that I wrote because of the way that it came about. I hope that this will not be too boring. This has long been a dream of mine. But it got rejected the idea got rejected from a couple of publishers.
Sure.
But then the publisher that I worked with for Storied and Scandalous actually approached me and asked me if I wanted to write it because they were doing a series of shipwreck books. And I was like, this is my dream. How perfect. So I ended up signing a really aggressive contract with them towards the end of October 2020. And in my mind, this was going to be the best thing ever because I was going to write this in haunted lighthouses. I was going to spend a bunch of time at the Shipwreck Museum in Whitefish. Like every dream that I've ever had about maritime disasters was going to come true. And then I think we all know that none of that happened because in less than a month, our lives were changed forever.
Sure.
So if it wasn't for our good friends at Wisconsin Marine Historical Society, as well as a few universities that open their digital collections to researchers, I would not have been able to do this. So I still have dreams of being able to go to those lighthouses, and maybe I'll just read the book there.
Yeah, well, and maybe then they'll just come to you. Maybe that's a fun way for everybody to read it, is to bring it to these. Definitely go down by the lake when you're going to read it. Yeah. That's a good way to do it. Pam wants to know, will you be doing another presentation like this on other ship stories? So she's hooked. So will there be other presentations as the book comes out?
Well, sure. I know for sure I'm doing one with Boswell on July 13th. I don't know what ships I'll do. I try to mix it up just so that people don't get bored. Sure. And then, of course, I'll be doing shipwreck stories every Thursday on the Vista King with Milwaukee Boat Tour.
Sure. Kate has a specific question: as what sources did you use for the firsthand accounts that you found? How did you find those?
Okay, so because this book spans so many years, there's all different ways that you can do that. I often spend a lot of time going through old newspapers because they are a great source of information. And you can trace stories day by day. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those details that are interesting to a person like me, but maybe not somebody who does straight marine history, would leave out. So like ghostly things don't make it to the serious books, but they do make it to newspapers. And you can go back and read those stories and kind of find the traces of that.
Which is a ton of fun to go through old newspapers anyway. You see so many cool things, even when you're not looking for.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite places to look through old stuff is at Milwaukee County Historical Society, the most beautiful library in the city, in my opinion.
Thank you. And then I think a good one to wrap up, because a lot of people are just interested in just how they get more information from you on what's going on with your different tours, your walking tours, your boat tours, all that stuff. And so I'm just going to flash that because I'm guessing that's the best way is to go to your website.
Yeah. Follow Gothic Milwaukee or the website. We'll have everything up. And we're going to start walking on Milwaukee Day. So Milwaukee Day, we have a tour on April 14th. And then hopefully we'll be able to get spooky with you from then until Halloween.
Cool. Awesome. Well, always a pleasure to have you on, Anna. And like she said, her book's coming out in July, and we will have it at the Milwaukee County Historical Society, and she'll sign it. So that's fun. Cool.
Thank you guys so much for coming. It really means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
And don't forget, next week we have another thrilling talk with John Eastberg and the Pabst Mansion, Captain Frederick Pabst Beyond the Brew House. So make sure that's the number one question that they get on a tour.
I know, and they hate it, but it's true. Oh, John's the best. I can't wait till next week.
So next week, so that's April 8th, right? Yeah. So yes, April 8th is a week from today. Duh. And that's at 7:30. So it's the same place as here. So if you found your way here today, then you can find your way there next week. But everybody stay safe, and we hope to see you next time.
Bye, guys. Thank you.